get this party started.
If you Google search for the best meta horror movies, The Cabin in the Woods is often the top result. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll briefly talk about why it deserves the crown, so we're all on the same page. And then we'll discuss the writing secret at the heart of the script, that allowed the screenwriters to come up with the story in merely 3 days. By the way, a quick note, this is my first YouTube video. I'm still learning the craft, so if you are about to click away, I'd really appreciate if you could reply to my comment below letting me know why. Your feedback is incredibly valuable to help me get better. If you haven't seen The Cabin in the Woods, fair warning, this video will contain spoilers. But don't worry, the movie has so much to offer beyond what I'll be describing here that it's still absolutely worth watching. If I had to summarize the meta-brilliance of The Cabin in the Woods in one sentence, it would be this. They found a way to weaponize typical horror movie tropes. Take the classic example, the protagonist deciding to split up.
We should split up.
In most horror movies, this is just a dumb decision that weakens the story. But in Cabin, the trope is explicitly used to criticize the kind of movies that rely on it. All of these tropes are used intentionally to say something deeper about the horror genre. What allows The Cabin in the Woods to weaponize these tropes is a concept called mise en abîme in French. I guess the English translation is
Mise en abîme.
It's this idea of having a story within a story. And like Hadley says in the movie,
the only ones watching.
Citizen, Hadley and their team explicitly talk about the script the characters are following,
It's a key scenario.
even complaining that it's unoriginal. So when Dana drops her weapon, it's not the movie itself being silly. It's Citizen and Hadley subliminally influencing her to drop it. And by extension, it's Goddard and Joss Whedon critiquing the cliché of horror protagonists always losing their weapons at the worst moment. Reframing the Cabin protagonists as actors, and Citizen and Hadley as directors.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
He had the conch in his hand.
Makes total sense within the story. But what makes it even more brilliant is that the movie doesn't break the fourth wall explicitly. Instead, it uses the old gods, a metaphor for the audience, to justify everything. The story suggests that the tropes exist not because the filmmakers are lazy, but because the audience demands them.
Gotta keep the customer satisfied.
And this is why The Cabin in the Woods works so well. And you can walk away without picking up on any of the deeper layers and still have a great time. But writing something this layered and brilliant, that's no small feat. So how did Goddard and Joss Whedon manage to write it in just 3 days? Well, I think I have an idea. The makers of The Cabin in the Woods wanted to write a love-hate letter to horror movies. And this mindset informs a lot of the meta decisions that they've made. But it's not an actual starting point for a story. It doesn't put words on a blank page. For that you need actual story ideas. So what's this idea at the heart of the script? Well, it's easy to tell which are not at the heart. For example, the elevator between the cabin and the offices of the directors. It's a cool idea, but not a starting point, and only comes up when the writers need a solution to bridge two story worlds. On the other hand, the fundamental idea, by definition, is not built on top of pre-existing context. It has to pop up naturally in the writer's mind. Ideas don't come from nowhere though. They're the output of your mind, but you need to feed it with input first. In our case, naturally, you look to other horror movies for inspiration. Watching a few with the family, you will soon notice the pattern of the artifacts of doom. Generally found in basements or attics, they will curse the movie protagonists. And after you go to bed, having traumatized your children by showing them these movies way too early, you're right, wouldn't it be fun if there was a basement with not just one artifact of doom, but an absurdly high amount? And next morning you think, well, that's not a revolutionary idea, I'm just taking a trope to its comedic extreme, like The Incredibles poking fun at the trope of the long evil speeches by having their villain give an even longer one.
Sly dog! You got me monologuing!
Still, let's see if this idea of the many artifacts has legs. If we're going to write a story around it, we need to figure out what the artifacts are doing there, all together in the basement. Usually they would belong to the previous victims in this kind of movies, but this answer is not really satisfying here, because we have many artifacts, not just one, and no regular person would own so many. If you have one artifact, you're unlucky, but if you have more, then you're doing it on purpose. So we need someone highly competent to own the basement, a sort of collector figure.
Everything you see in here is either haunted, cursed, or has been used in some kind of ritualistic practice.
That's one side of the equation, but we also need the characters who will come across the artifacts in the basement. So the idea of the artifacts is already fertile, because after looking at it for a few seconds, it already gave us two orthogonal forces in our story. Now that we have a basis for our characters, let's talk about their motivations. For the protagonists, because they will be the ones to find the artifacts, we need them in a place they've never seen before, and where they will have to stay the night, something like a vacation in a cabin in the woods. Now what about the collector? Why does he have these artifacts? Are they precious to him? Does he like looking at them? Well, no. If that was the case, he wouldn't let them lying around for spring breakers to find.
Oh, this is awesome.
So this leaves us with two options. Either the collector is dead and lost control of the artifacts, or he's evil and likes to curse young people. But if he's dead, then we have no one to give exposition and explain that the protagonists are choosing the monster that will attack them.
So basically, if they activate an artifact, they'll awake the corresponding monster. For example, that book is for the Buckners. The conch calls the merman, and the killing sphere calls the guy with the metal in his head.
Because yeah, by the way, that's yet another idea that the many artifacts give us for free, that each is linked to a monster, implying the existence of something resembling a nightmarish zoo. And if the collector is dead, then that exposition will have to happen either through a note, a recording, or a flashback, which are all clunky solutions. So as writers, it's better for us if the collector is alive, but then it means he's cursing the young people on purpose. So why would he do such a thing? For fun? Or because he needs to give offerings to the monsters? Well, maybe both. And if it's for fun, then he must be watching, otherwise he cannot enjoy the show. So the basement and its surroundings should have cameras allowing the evil collector to monitor. And if he's got all this, then he can probably control the physical space in the cabin too, like the doors, and even of the entire area to keep the protagonists in his trap. And from here emerges the idea of having one side of the story watching the other, and thus the idea of the movie within a movie. But all this is a lot for one person, so he'd logically have a team, and since this operation would be costly, it's not a one-time thing. They'd have to lure the victims regularly to justify the elaborate
Japan and
setup.
us.
Well, it's not the first time it's come down to that.
Please, we haven't had a glitch since '98.
Okay, so we have a mostly functional basis for a story, but it's still lacking something. We haven't pressed all the juice from the idea of the artifacts yet, because one key aspect that is still missing is that the entire idea is kind of absurd and playful. So it's only normal for the collector and his team to wonder which monsters the protagonist will pick.
He had the conch in his hand.
And because it's not their first time, they will each have built their preferences over time. And in this case, as the writers of the story, the idea of having the evil team holding bets practically falls on our laps. It's a perfect fit, and a dynamic way to give exposition about the fact that the protagonists will be choosing their monsters. And if they have bets, then a cool idea would be for one of the evil collectors to die by the teeth of the monster he has chosen. That feels like a fairly easy win.
Oh, come on.
But now if we want to do that, we have a problem as writers. How can we come up with a scenario that will unleash the monsters against the evil team? Because they seemed highly competent and for sure they have very good security against the monsters. Instead of overthinking it, we can lean into absurdity once again, like we did with the many artifacts, and take the well-known trope of the that usually saves the character from impossible situations. We don't even need to make an effort here because the more absurd the better, and so when Dana presses the red button at the end of the movie, she might as well say,
"Do whatever the writers need."
The cabin in the woods works so well because its foundational idea, the basement filled with the artifacts, is incredibly fertile. And when you start with a concept this strong, the rest of the story flows naturally.
No, ma'am, I forgot to ask them to like and subscribe. I apologize. Yes, ma'am, I will do it now.